Hello and welcome to Community Connection. I'm Iowa City Mayor Bruce Teague. July is Disability Pride Month, a time where we can celebrate people with disability and advocate for a more inclusive and accessible world. From infrastructure and buildings to programming and activities, when accessibility and inclusivity are considered in all aspects of our community, everyone benefits. Today I'm joined by two guests, Erin Kay and Mike Hoenig. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Hello, hello, hello. Very excited because this is a milestone, 30 years when we're thinking about disabilities. So let's begin by each of you introducing yourselves to us and just telling us a little bit about your background and how you're an advocate for accessibility. So we'll probably start with you, Erin.
Well, thanks, Mayor Bruce. Thank you so much for having us. This is the first time I've met you, so this is a really neat opportunity. So I'm Erin Kay. I'm the founder of my own company called Claiming Disability Incorporated. We're a registered LLC. We work to educate, empower, and advocate for people with disabilities. We believe in creating media projects created by people with disabilities for people with disabilities. So we have a weekly podcast that we do where we interview people from all walks of life. We interview caregivers, people in the community like yourself who care about disability rights and accommodations and advocacy. The last week we just interviewed Councilman Alex Waters from Sioux City. There's some representatives with disabilities out there in the political sphere. We need more representation like that. My background is in education. I graduated with an education and nonprofit degree. I've lived in Iowa City for 4 years. Before that, I lived in Des Moines and I worked in health insurance. And then I moved to Iowa City and I got a job with NAMI of Johnson County. If you're not familiar with NAMI, it's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They work to educate, advocate, and empower people with mental illness in Johnson County. And they're well known for their Our Place Pure Wellness Center, which is a mental health drop-in center located on Kennedy Plaza in Iowa City. So I did fundraising. I was the walk manager for 4 years. And now I've kind of taken on my own venture with my own company, with my business partner from Minnesota, Molly Miller. So I have a disability. I identify as a pretty powerful disabled woman, along with my business partner, Molly Miller, who has cerebral palsy. I use a walker. She uses a wheelchair. We're kind of a dynamic duo. Please check out our merch store. This month is Disability Pride Month, so if you feel like wearing your disability like a badge of honor and claiming disability, we don't think disability is a bad word. We're celebrating, we're having a party, and especially with the 30th signing of the ADA, we're pretty stoked.
Well, it sounds like you are definitely an advocate and have been very busy, so thank you for introducing yourself. Mike, we're going to switch over to you, and please introduce yourself and tell us about your background.
All right. Well, thank you, Mayor Teague, and thank you for this opportunity to highlight disability, especially during the week of the 30th anniversary of the ADA. So my name is Mike Hoenig. I am a program coordinator at the University of Iowa Center for Disabilities and Development. I've worked there for over 26 years now. I work on several programs related to such things as teaching health professionals etiquette for working with individuals, patients with disabilities. I support adults with disabilities in a leadership training program. And we recently have embarked on a couple of new ventures to really promote self-advocacy and self-determination among people with disabilities. And it's interesting to me that we're kind of having to re-energize that process, because 30 years ago when the ADA was signed, I was actually working for a Center for Independent Living in the Quad Cities where I still live. And I remember a lot of the work that went into the passage of the ADA both in terms of policymakers like Senator Harkin, who was the lead sponsor, but also the groundswell and the grassroots effort of people with disabilities who really championed the cause and expressed the need in many, many different ways for the civil rights legislation, which we know now as the ADA. So I'm really excited to be here. It's cool to be doing this with Erin, because at the time the law was passed, that you were at a very different stage in your life, Erin, as was I. But I actually remember when it got signed, and I remember walking into the office, the Independent Living Center, on the Monday after the signage, and having just this huge celebration, just kind of impromptu. So it's bringing back a lot of memories.
Well, thanks both of you for telling us about your background. And we've mentioned the ADA, which is the American Disabilities Act of 1990. And it actually right now is coinciding with Disabilities Pride Month. And so I want maybe one of you to explain, what is the ADA?
As I mentioned previously, a civil rights law that protects individuals with disabilities in many, many different ways. There are four major titles to it. One has to do with employment, and in terms of decreasing or eliminating barriers to employment. And that's not just hiring, that's in the application process, in the interview process, in the benefits process, and that it does prohibit discrimination. Of course, there are law regulations in terms of who's covered and who's not, but just in general terms, that's one of the titles, the main titles, if you will. Another is public services. So this would be services, like transportation, if a city has a recreation department, or a county or state, those types of things have to be accessible to individuals with disabilities. The third title relates to public accommodations. And so that covers a wide range of areas. It could be a stadium, a sports stadium. I'm a huge baseball fan. So, the fact that stadiums now have to be accessible, but it's also related to theaters. It could be zoos. It could be just where people want to go, restaurants. And people think about it primarily in terms of physical accessibility, but it also involves other types of, programmatic accessibility in terms of, in my case, either having Braille menus or providing an accommodation so that I know what's on the menu at a restaurant. Or for a person who's deaf, if you go to Hampshire and some of the other places around Iowa City, for instance, you'll notice that there are loops now that will allow individuals with low hearing to be able to enjoy the same thing, the audio, in a way that they may never have since the loss of their hearing. And that's all due to the ADA. And then the fourth title has to do with telecommunications. And at the time, devices called TTYs were in high use by the deaf community to communicate. And it set up a national relay system where an individual would use their TTY, which is like a teletype, like a mini typewriter that connected to the phone, and they would type a message, and the relay operator would voice it to the hearing person and then serve as a relay. She or he would then type the response back to the person who's deaf. Now that's a lot of that technology is now done through texting and other technology, but at the time, that was a very, very valuable service because it opened up the services in communities to people who are deaf in a way that had never been opened before. So that's just a very, very broad overview of the four main titles of the ADA.
I just wanted to kind of add, so there's kind of another movement too, like Mike touched on with the ADA, and it's kind of like the ADA 2.0. With technology and social media and kind of that, the uprising of that. I mean, I was born in 1988, so I was born with a lot of ADA privileges, and now, so we've I can say as a physically disabled person who uses a walker, we fixed a lot of the physical barriers that Mike was addressing, but obviously there's still work that needs to be done. But also in online, making sure your website is accessible with image descriptions, making sure that the website has a reader that you're able to make payments online and have that accessibility in online as well. So we're kind of moving into that movement, making sure that we have those accommodations as well.
You actually answered what I was going to ask. 1990 is very different from 2000. 2000 and even 2020. Technology has changed, and so I just wanted to know, like, what are some of the differences between then and now that you all have seen? But I guess I would like to hear your personal stories relating to ADA. I know, Mike, for you, you lived prior to ADA. So you have potentially some experiences that you can talk about how the ADA has been beneficial or some of the challenges. And then for you, Erin, because of when you were born, ADA has always been there. But of course, there's been changes recently, and especially with your business, I imagine that you do see some of those. So we'll start with you, Mike, and maybe you can tell us a little bit of what you've seen. Here are your personal experiences.
Well, sure. And it's very interesting to reflect back because it's not like we signed the ADA and then the next day the light turned on and everything was accessible. There
Wouldn't
has
that have been awesome?
yeah, wouldn't that have been great? Well, it didn't quite work that way, and
Well,
so
not
a lot
quite.
of a lot of the changes have happened over time. I think the ADA really was a catalyst for those changes. So I mean, I still remember growing up and having lots of curbs where you had to step up on the curb. There were no curb ramps. So first it was the curb ramp, and then it was the little they're called domes the rough the little domes that go over the curb ramps so that a person that's blind can use their cane to find them as they cross the street. So some of those kinds of things, the physical access, but it's come in waves. So things like the Pentecrest in Iowa City. For many, many years, even after the ADA, there were steps, and a lot of those steps have finally gone away. I think there's a law is only as good as how well it can be implemented. So I've seen those kinds of changes in terms of the physical environment. I am old enough to remember when having accessible entrances was not the norm. Having interpreters was not the norm. There are still times when there's a battle about whether we have interpreters or captions or, and so, it's not like everything is just fixed, but I mean, I think there's an understanding and an expectation. And it's interesting now with the Black Lives Matter movement and just the social justice thing. I think there's even more of a a push for inclusion right now. So, I think we're seeing that continue. I guess on a personal level, first it was Braille menus that were kind of the in thing. And then audio description of live theater and of a number of television programs became an issue that was in terms of the ADA that I experienced. And then through technology, whether it's web access or even with my job, being able to have the accessible equipment that I need, and there being processes in place for me to do that. Whereas prior to the ADA, a lot of those accommodations were not necessarily required. And now, 30 years later, at least in the area of the space where I work, we see them as a matter of course. And well, of course you would do it. But, I think we still have a ways to go. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And Erin, we'll switch over to you just to kind of get your perspective, since this is all you've ever known as the ADA law to be enforced?
Well, now, so the phrasing there is interesting that you say that, because I'm going to quote a gal from Crip Camp. It's a documentary that just came out that was directed by a personal friend of mine, Jim Bulbrecht, on Netflix. And she talks about the ADA is only as good as when it's actually enforced. Like Mike is saying, and like you're saying, I think we do have a little ways to go. Now, see, being from Iowa, I've grown up in Iowa my whole life. I went to school in Mount Pleasant, just about 45 minutes away from here. So living in a small town, I was very accustomed to going to a movie theater and having to go up steps or having to have somebody carry me, up the steps. And I'm like, this is like 2009. Like, you know what I mean? So I think a lot of the infrastructure changes, I mean, they're implemented. Um, and I think when they are implemented, businesses benefit. Your business will benefit by being accessible to everyone. If you make it, accessible for everyone to be able to partake, trust me, disabled people, we're patrons. We like to buy stuff too. I love going to Raygun. It's like super accessible. Like, and that's the thing. It's like you have to remember when you're doing closed captioning for a live stream for your business, you're helping somebody who might not be able to access that media material without that closed captioning. When you're adding an image description to your business, you're helping so that person can buy a piece of merchandise and feel included, for one thing. I think all businesses, whether it's ADA related or accommodations related, we should all try to be the most inclusive we can possibly be. And what's so cool with the Black Lives Matters movement right now, and Mayor Teague, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's also a disabled Black Lives Matter movement. So I think that's important to highlight. Disabled Black Lives Matter as well. There's some intersectionality there, right? Because during Crip Camp, they kind of talk about, you go through like the 1970s, and there's an intersection of the gay community, the African American community, and the disability rights community. We're all in this together. When we're talking about minority groups, when we're doing sensitivity trainings, if you include people with disabilities, that just means, we're all part of it. I think we can all really relate to being excluded, whether you're being excluded from a business or you're being excluded from a job opportunity, which unfortunately has happened. And it's 2020. And again, I think that comes down to perceptions. When people see me roll into their office, unfortunately, there's a perception that I'm not as competent as the able-bodied person. I think we really need to start changing the language around disability, because people inherently think when you say, oh, I'm a disabled woman, their first reaction is, oh, no, you're not. I'm like, yes, I am. Yeah. I am disabled. I am disabled as heck. Like, sorry, but like when you see me, I am disabled. Don't take our identifier away. Disabled does not mean bad. Disabled does not mean unprofessional. Disabled does not mean incompetent. We have to change the language. And that starts with just being more inclusive of groups and hearing more voices. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Although there is a little bit of a divide amongst those that talk about disability. It's something that people don't want to be labeled as. And then now there is kind of, I heard you say it earlier, Erin, reclaiming the word disability with great pride. And so that is something that I want to know, what are your thoughts on that divide within our community?
It is interesting because I grew up in, within growing up in the disability rights and independent living movement, where we put the person first. And I continue to believe that. I believe that, for one thing, I've never been a fan of the word disability. I don't have a better option, and that's what we've kind of settled on over the years. But if you dissect it, it's, dis is not, so not ability, and that's not who I am.
Yeah.
But that's the word that seems to have been settled on, and that's a lot better than handicapped or some other things that people have come along the years. But being blind is in my mind, is one part only of my identity. I mean, I'm a homeowner, I'm an employee, I'm a sports fan, I'm a gardener, I love to travel. So, when I wake up in the morning, the first thing is not in my mind, well, what's going on with the blindness today? It's what have I got to do today, and what am I looking forward to? And so I see myself as a person first. And, I think there's actually a national organization called People First, or Self Advocates Becoming Empowered. And then from that, there are People First chapters around the country. So that's kind of where I come from on that.
And I completely understand. And let me make something clear. At Claiming Disability, Inc., Claiming Disability, your disability journey is your own. We definitely understand person first language, like Mike is talking about, persons with disability, versus identity first language, which is what I use, disabled person. There is nothing wrong with however you want to identify as a disabled person. But I do think that there's a misconception, like Mike is talking about, I look at myself as a person first. With the identity first movement, we do look at ourselves as people. We're disabled people. We're a culture, and we're proud of it. So person first language was created by the able-bodied community. So we inherently are reclaiming, as you said, Mayor Teague, we're reclaiming that label, and that's why we have, movies like Crip Camp. Everybody at Camp Jened in New York City called it Crip Camp because that was the culture. I can't wait until we go to Crip Camp this summer. Like, it's a culture.
Mm-hmm.
I say disabled, and I say it proudly. My shirt says pretty, disabled, and powerful. Again, it comes down to semantics. And I think when Mike's like in the Webster's dictionary, disabled says not, I think we need to change the vernacular of disabled means a person who's very familiar with community resources. A disabled person is somebody who is very familiar with being oppressed. A disabled person is very familiar with the accommodations in their community. A disabled person can relate to other disabled people. I don't have the same disabled experience as Mike. I'm a disabled woman. I have cerebral palsy. I use a walker. I don't know what it's like to be visually impaired, but I can relate to not being able to get the accommodations that I need, to have people look at me like I'm less. And again, with the Reclaim movement, we've decided to not give people that power. We're taking back the label, and we're disabled and proud. I like to say disabled and fierce. We've got a t-shirt in our merch store, disabled and fierce. Hello, goodbye. Link in the comments, y'all. Go to our merch store if you want to celebrate Disability Pride. And which, by the way, for Disability Pride Month, Claiming Disability, we celebrate disability every day because it's a beautiful part of our identity. To take it out of our identity doesn't make any sense because, like Mike says, yeah, maybe I don't instinctually wake up and say, wow, I have cerebral palsy today, but I know when I'm going into the world, I will encounter something that, my disability will be impacted by. And it's not us, it's the barriers surrounding us that are inaccessible that makes the world hard for us to get around. So that's not something where we have to take away our identity. the world needs to be fixed to include others in terms of disability and media representation and stuff like that. That's not us. We out here celebrating.
I hear you.
Like,
So, yeah, so what I might say is, so anybody that's out there looking at this episode today is to do self-examination about what is their knowledge of ADA, and how within their world can they contribute to the enforcement. Because I think that's the key, is that is as good as it is enforced, right? And so do self-examination. One thing that I'm proud of is that the city of Iowa City, you know, when I think about our parks and our rec centers, we look at ADA. Now, of course, there's something to be said where we can always do better, but I think we're looking at it. I think one step is assessment. The other thing is when there are developers coming into town, it's important to do universal design, to have that a part of the project so that people can remain in the place where they call home and not have to move. So there's a great opportunity within the community for education. Now you're talking about the celebration, right, of Disability Pride Month. With COVID-19, it was to happen right around now, but it's not going to happen. You're looking at, is it October 3rd that you're going to do a celebration?
Yeah.
Is it going to be online?
It is. We're still actually doing some planning, obviously, and taking something online. It is amazing how much change has to happen. So, you know, we envision, for those that have attended ADA celebrations in the past, we've talked about awards, and I'm really excited to. We're working on now a process for providing some recognition for, or not recognition, well, doing that too, but also providing some funding for a local either advocacy group or agency that is doing something inclusive and involving people with disabilities in that. So we're also, and Erin, maybe you'd like, because I'm not quite up to speed where we are, but I know that we've had a lot of discussion with the Harkin Institute about either having Senator Harkin or a representative either present online or sharing a prepared video, because we really do want, and we've often been asked about why October. And the original plan was to really make this we've struggled for attendance in the last few years, and we thought, man, this will be great to bring students in and figure that all out. So it still is an evolving process. But Erin, what would you like to add?
and Mike, you need to remember that October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So that will actually fit perfectly with that. And our theme for this year for the ADA celebration is employment is empowering. So we are getting a representative from the Harkin Institute. We're stoked about that. In Iowa, Senator Harkin's former Senator Harkin is kind of a big deal. So we're super stoked. Yeah, and so it'll be in October for National Disability Employment Awareness. And again, like Senator Harkin mentions in the Harkin Institute, he just did a presentation actually virtually where he discussed this very thing. Our final frontier for people with disabilities is the employment piece. We need to be walking, excuse me, maybe that's a bad word, rolling the roll when it comes to representation of disabled people in the workforce. Young disabled women and young disabled men need to know that they can be directors, that they can be CEOs, that they can be doctors, you know, as a disabled person. Who's more empathetic to somebody who has been a patient, but a disabled person who's in the medical field? There's a really lovely gal who we love that's called a seated nurse. She is an African American woman who has a disability and is a nurse. And the only reason she got a job is because of COVID. And she works in New York City. And they were like, we have a nursing shortage. We need as many bodies as we can. She had applied for over 85 nursing jobs. Guys, like, it's not difficult to get a nursing job because people need healthcare professionals. My husband works at Mercy. Like, people need those jobs. And so she was being turned down essentially because of her disability. And now she has a job. So I think COVID is actually, it's ironic. Disabled people, we've been preparing for this our entire lives because we have often had to be resourceful when it comes to work, either working remotely or, I take public transportation, the lovely Iowa City public transportation. I think it's a wonderful resource for disabled people. But again, it's hard to get around. So I think with COVID, it's been really interesting how we've been able to be accommodating during this time.
For us in the community that don't have a physical disability or maybe some other challenges, it's important to hear from individuals that do have some impairments, and tell us how we can be more in tuned or educated on some things. So thanks for being a part today to both of you. Any closing words that you would like to say?
I do want to let you guys know that our virtual ADA event that will be taking place on October 3rd, it's free to the public. Anyone can register. I highly recommend, if you're a caregiver of somebody with a disability, if you're a disabled person yourself, that you join us and attend. It will be accessible. We will have ASL interpreters. We will have closed captioning. We will make sure you have the accessibility that you need. And it's going to be a really interesting session. You're going to feel empowered and ready to just take on the world after you be part of this Zoom session. So,
Awesome.
I just want to wish everybody a happy 30th ADA celebration. And, and as you watch this, just think about ways that you can include people with disabilities in, whether it's your circle of friends, your job, your employment, your business, wherever it is that you have a sphere of influence. Just realize that we are a part of the community, and remember the ADA and what it stands for and what we have accomplished.
Thanks to both of you. We're all in this together, and happy Pride.
thank you.
Yes, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our show today. We'll be back again next week with more community connection. Until then, stay safe.